Hi, this is Nikki from Lavender and Sea, and welcome to my tutorial on painting Bougainvillea. This was a request that I got via Instagram for an art tutorial, and I'm really excited to be showing you guys how to paint Bougainvillea today. Now this will be in my traditional detailed layered style. It will be a little bit of a longer tutorial, and just want to let you know beforehand. The first thing we're going to do is I'm going to show you a couple pictures of Bougainvillea so we can get a general idea of the shape of the flower. If you guys aren't familiar with Bougainvillea, their petals are almost leaves. I don't know if they are considered leaves, but that's basically what they are, they're a really, really interesting and beautiful flower. They're usually very bright in color. These are some ones that I found in Santa Barbara, and I just couldn't stop taking pictures of them because they are so pretty. But these are a bright pink and kind of coral orangey color. That's what we're going to be painting today. The first thing we need to do is sketch. I have a pretty small watercolor block today. This is a 7" by 10", and I'm just going to do a little branch of Bougainvillea right in the middle. If you're not working on a watercolor block, make sure that you tape down your paper to a surface, because we're going to be using a lot of water, and when you use a lot of water, it can make it warp. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to draw this line coming down and another line right here. This is our branch, one branch and then an offshoot of the branch to give us a little more interest. And I want to have leaves on here today, so I'm going to start off over here with a leaf shape. The leaves kind of curl with Bougainvillea, so you can make it a little curly. Make sure you're drawing really light. I'm drawing a little bit darker just because I want you to be able to see it, but we don't want our pencil marks to show through the watercolor, so just make sure you're drawing very lightly. Now over here, I'm going to do my first Bougainvillea flower, and I'm going to start off with the center where it has those little circles on the stamen. So I'm just drawing 2 of those. So really thin lines. I'll show you guys a picture right now so you can see what I'm talking about. See in the center how there's those 2 white tops on the little stamens. I don't know what the correct term is, I'm sorry, but you can see what I'm talking about. Then I want to make my first petal, and it's the same shape as this leaf. I'm gonna kind of make it a little bit like wavy here and come around. And I'm going to stop right here because I'm gonna make another one come up and cross over, and it's also gonna cross over the branch. Now, when we go in to do the details in this, we're going to put the veins of this petal in, but for now, we're just gonna leave it as is. I'm gonna make a second petal back here. Perfect. Now I am going to do another leaf back here. And I'm just basically want to show that it goes behind this one, so you're not going to see the end of it. And I'm just going to thicken up this branch here because we want to make sure that this branch has a little thickness to it where it shows. Also, I highly recommend having an eraser. I like to use a gummy eraser. You don't want to erase watercolor paper too much because you'll ruin the texture, so press down and pull up if you need to erase a little bit. I'm going to make another flower right here, and this one I'm going to start again with those little center white areas. I'm going to do 3 this time, and they're going to kind of overlap. And then I'm going to come in with a petal that's kind of pouring down. Oh, I'm not showing where it connects because this is a straight down view. Coming over here, and then maybe making a little petal come up over this, and then we'll have one come out. As you can see, they're very leaf shaped. And over here, I'm just going to do some random petals because bougainvilleas really grow together and there's a lot of them overlapping. We don't have to be perfect about, you know, where everything's overlapping, but you get the general idea. Okay, and maybe I'll just do a little tiny petal coming out over here. And then I want to do one where it's just the side view. So you're not going to see the center area. So a big wavy petally leaf. And then maybe one coming out here that's a little bit more wavy. Same thing, and then again, we have our stem connecting them. I am going to put a regular leaf, but I want this leaf maybe be a little smaller. And then have one come out here that's a side view. Okay, so these are our leaves, leaves, bougainvillea. I think that's probably good. Let's do one more. I'm gonna show just one of that little white area and have the petals coming up around it. Okay. And then a leaf coming down. All right, there is our drawing of the bougainvillea. The first thing we want to do is put down our first layer. We're going to be using pinks and oranges, and then of course green for the leaves. Mix up our colors. I am going to be using permanent rose today. I think I am, hold on, let's see. Permanent rose as well as opera rose, kind of that bright pink color, and then a little bit of Scarlet Lake. Then I'll be mixing in some yellows to brighten it up a little bit. I am going to start with a size 6 brush and just really bringing in a lot of water because this is our base layer. It's going to be our lightest layer. Bougainvillea also has kind of a transparency to the petals. I keep wanting to call them leaves. We want to make sure to bring that in. I'm going to take a little bit of yellow ochre and bring it in to get more of a blushy tone. And we also are going to have some that are a little more orange. So I'm just waking up this orange over here for our base layer. I might add just a little bit of red so it's not so orange, more burnt orange. If you guys haven't painted with me before, I like to use 2 water cups, one for warm tones and one for cool tones. This ensures that your colors stay really bright and vibrant. I'm getting some water and that really light pink tone, and I'm just going to come in and paint. So we're using a wet on dry technique. Make sure you paint around the stamen and around that little white part inside the flower. And you want a very light pink here. If you feel that you added too much paint, just rinse off your brush, then dry off your brush. I always have a paper towel right here. And you can pull up. So you're just going to take your brush and press down and you can pull up the color if you need to. I am going to paint this whole flower this color. And then when we do our second layer, we can alter that a little bit. And we'll be painting in shadows, all that fun stuff. Like I said, this is going to be a little bit longer tutorial because we're using a layered style, but I did receive some feedback recently that you guys prefer that I paint in the typical style that I usually paint in with lots of layers because you like my artwork and you want to do stuff that's similar. So that is what I'm doing here. We're gonna let this one be orange and then we're gonna do all the rest the same pink. Now we're gonna make sure that we have variation in this because it gets really boring if you just use the same pink color on this entire thing. What I can do is maybe add a little yellow to this one Or you can add more red if you want, or pink. And again, we're just putting the base layer down here. Okay, and then that's the leaf, but this is another petal here. It's okay if it bleeds right now. We're okay with anything bleeding right now into the other petals because this is just the base layer. So I'm not overly concerned if it, you know, bleeds a little bit, but later on we will want layers to be completely dry. We don't want them to bleed. Sometimes it's just, I don't know, I just love how it looks like this when I first start. Now grab that orangey color, and I'm gonna add a little extra yellow to it, and we're gonna paint this one orange, but a really, really light watery orange. Make sure that your brush has a good tip on it. I'm using a size 6, but if you need to use a smaller size or larger, feel free. But we definitely have some sharp edges here that you need a nice brush to come in to get those. Nice brush tip. And if I remember correctly, these were petals over here. Almost forgot about those. So we are gonna have a little bleeding over here, but that's okay. Make sure you get all your petals. Okay, perfect. All our petals are done, and now we need to mix up a green. I'm going to start, the Bougainvillea leaves are usually pretty green. I wanna say almost like hooker's green, if you guys are familiar with that color. But I wanna start really light. I mixed up a yellowy green here. And same thing, we are using a lot of water on our brush. Now you never want your brush to be dripping with water. That's too much. If it is doing that, just lightly tap it on your paper towel. And we are just painting these leaves. We do not, however, want to touch any of the petals right now because they're not dry, and we don't want our green bleeding into the pink. That's not the vibe we're going for today. Just lightly paint. And we're not gonna be able to touch anything yet because those are all still wet. But what we're gonna do is let this dry, and then we're gonna come back and we can work on the rest of it. We are all dry, and now we can work on our other leaves. Just come in and paint the additional leaves. Don't worry about them being all the same tone right now. We'll fix that later. But do make sure that you paint around your stem or branch. If you guys want your watercolor paper to dry faster, you can get a hair dryer and do it that way. I also, just make sure you don't hold the hair dryer too close to the artwork or it might burn it, which you don't want that. Or something I like to do, because it's nice and sunny where I live right now, I just put it out on the balcony and it dries really fast. Side note, watercolor can fade from the sun. If that's a concern of yours, then maybe don't put it in the sun, but it doesn't bother me. Not for this. If you do custom watercolor artwork and you don't want it to get faded from the sun, I highly recommend getting a frame that has SPF glass in it, UV protection. Okay, we have our leaves all painted, and we can't go in and paint the branch right now because this is wet, but what we can do is start on some of these petals. Now that we have our base layer down, we want to grab that same color, but make it just slightly darker and more saturated. And now we're going to go in and add layering. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pick a petal, have my paint on my brush, and I'm going to outline that petal. Then I'm going to rinse off my brush. I have just water on my brush, make sure it's not dripping off, and I'm going to blend that in. I want you to think about where the light is coming from on your painting, because that's going to be important and that's your major rule. So for me, I'm gonna say the light is coming from the right, upper right. So this petal right here would be light, but it would be darker down here. So how I pull up the light here is I just rinse off my brush, dry it off, and then just press my brush down, what I showed you guys earlier. Or just not allowing the color to get up there. This petal is touching this one, but since it's the bottom area, it's okay. I am going to do the same thing I just did. And you're gonna see it's gonna bleed a little bit, but that's okay because it would be more shadowed there. Now this petal would be more shadowed because it's underneath this one and it's basically shaded from our light source. So I'm just gonna go ahead and paint this one in completely. We can add darker shadows after this dries, but for now, that is good. And then we're just gonna do that same technique all the way around. Feel free to follow along with me if you want to. Coming over here, and I'm going to add a little more yellow ochre, so it's a little more blushy tone, because like I said, we don't want it to be exactly the same everywhere. That's boring to look at. Make sure to paint around that little white area on our flower. Then I'm gonna rinse off my brush and just move it around. If you're thinking, oh, that color looks kind of boring, because this is wet, you could grab, I'm gonna grab pink or whatever you want, and you can just poke it in and it'll bleed nicely. Just keep in mind where your light source is coming from. I'm gonna grab that same color and paint this. This petal right here is tucked in, so it's gonna be more dark. And I like to outline it and then get just water and blend it in. Always using that technique I taught you to pull up color if you feel like it's too dark or if there's too much water. Pretty, okay. And then our rule, of course, is we don't want to paint anything that's touching itself because it'll bleed, and we don't want bleeding because this is a highly detailed way of painting that we're doing now. Now I'm moving on to this flower over here, and I can't do that petal, but I can do this one. I was just testing it to see if it was dry. Just kind of outlining it here, rinsing off my brush, and just blending. So as you guys can see, I didn't outline up here, and the reason I did that is because of my light source, and I want this to stay really light. Now we can move on to our orange one, and I'm gonna mix in just a little more red. I also have this Indian yellow that I love. And I'm gonna add a little pink because I don't want it to be too red. But I think this might be red, we'll see. Yeah, that's really red. Add more orange. And I'm just painting around. I'm gonna outline this one all the way up until this edge. Make sure that your paint is not, if it's dry, it's not gonna work. So make sure that it's still a little bit wet. Rinse off your brush, get just water, and start blending. Now, I'm not really happy with this color, so I'm gonna add some more yellow to it. And since it's wet, I can just lightly poke it in. That's good. pull it up a little bit. And we can come over here because that petal's dry now. This is literally just my life is painting something and touching it to see if it's dry. Okay, we're painting this petal. Make sure you're mixing up a similar color to the other ones. And again, I'm just putting the paint right here and then grabbing just a little bit of water on my brush and blending it because I want it to be clear that there's light coming in right here. Moving on to, that's still wet. Let's move on to our leaves. I know this might seem crazy how I'm just jumping all over the place, but this is how I paint typically because I need to paint in the dry areas. And this is gonna give you more detail, crisp detail, because everything's dry when you're working on it. We're moving over to these leaves and I'm gonna mix up this same color, but just slightly darker. And I'm gonna do the same method. I'm gonna just outline this leaf, whole thing, around the edge with that color. I'm gonna rinse off my brush, grab just water, and just blend it in. Kind of like a scrubbing motion. Make sure you're using the side of your brush. Don't use the tip or you're gonna ruin your tip. And I'll grab just a slightly darker tone and poke it in around here. And it'll bleed nicely and give it that shadow. And I'm gonna do that over here as well. Now this one over here, I might add a little bit of yellow to it, so it's just slightly different color. And I'm just going to paint one edge, rinse off my brush, and then move that paint around. Beautiful. We can paint this one, so same technique. And we will be adding those small details, the veins of the leaves and the veins of the flowers at the end, so don't worry about that. We can paint this leaf over here. I don't want it to be exactly the same color because nature isn't that way. I'm gonna darken this one up a little bit. That is why things, in my opinion, I mean, not the only reason, but one of the reasons that things are so beautiful to look at and they intrigue us is because they're different. And that's a major rule when you're painting. You want things to look slightly different. Obviously, you don't want this one to be black and this one to be green. I mean, that could be a style of painting, but you want them to be close in the same color family, but different because it draws your eye in more. I'm just adding paint, wet paint right here. And I'm actually gonna do a line over here too because there would be a shadow here. And then getting just my water and blending it in. But the variation in tone will really draw people's eye into your artwork. And don't forget about this little part over here. That's another thing I wanna mention. I'm gonna make that bigger actually, is overlapping things will also draw your eye in. So this is our branch and the leaf is behind it, but we wanna show that it's really, the branch is in front of it. And so we have to add in this other part right here to our leaf. It really comes down to the smallest details sometimes, you guys, when you wanna make your paintings really good. And I think it's so important to think of those things. Make sure you're not touching any wet paint. Let's bring it down this color. And since this is wet, I'm gonna grab just a darker green and kind of poke it in right here because this would definitely be more shadowed because we have the flowers on both sides. Maybe I'll do that over here too. Make sure if you're gonna poke in color that the paint is nice and wet. Otherwise, it's not gonna do what you want it to do. Because you can see I'm just lightly poking it in. This is really wet and it's bleeding really nicely. And this is also a great way to add shadows if you don't want to wait for it to dry. So I'm just lightly poking it in. Okay, we can't touch that one because this is wet still. But now we can come back to this petal. And I remember that one had more yellow in it. I'm just gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna outline. And then just get my water. I can tell that I had a little green on my brush here because it got a little murky. But we are going to add deeper shadows later. I'm not gonna worry too much about that. Just make sure when you're switching between flowers that on your palette you remember, okay, this one is on the right side because it has more yellow. These are more pink. Otherwise, it's just all gonna blend together. Oops, I forgot that that's wet still. So I'm just going to pull up this color and we can come back to it. I'm gonna do this one over here. Add a little more pink. That one got. And we could do this one. It's just outlining around the yellow or the orange leaf. Maybe I want to add a little more pink. And blend it around. You can see my pencil marks because I didn't erase them too much because I wanted you guys to be able to see them. Now we can move to this orangey yellow one. Painting around those, should have really learned the name, the little white areas in the center of our flower. Pollen? I don't think they're pollen. If you know the name of them, will you say so in the comments? Because that would be awesome. I'm not a flower expert, I'm a painter. But I do enjoy learning about nature through my painting. That has been a cool part of it because I do love nature so much. Now I'm poking in some darker color here because technically there would be some shadows here and I like the variation. Feel free to do that if you like it. And I'm gonna see if there's anything else we can paint right now before I let this dry again. So that's wet, all of that's wet. We could paint this one. Now this petal is on top of all the other ones and we wanna keep it pretty light, but that light is way too light. I'm gonna grab some paint that's pretty watered down of that same color. And I'm just going to paint this edge down here. And because it's dry underneath, it's not gonna bleed because we do not want it to bleed. And then just lightly blend it. But keeping just a little bit of that really light color up there. I'm poking in a little bit darker down here where it all connects. Okay. Now I have to let this dry and then we can come back and add our next layer. We are all nice and dry and something that I want to do is I want to paint our branch here. We're going to start off painting it with a brownish gray color. We'll add green to it later, but I want it to be kind of a brownish tone. Okay. Grab a smaller brush. I'm working with a size 2, but honestly, the tip on this is so bad. I'm gonna move over to, I have this liner brush from the Pigeon Letters that is really great. And I'm just gonna paint it brown. And since everything's dry, we don't have to worry about it bleeding. Just make sure that you stay in the lines. I love Bougainvillea. It is so pretty. I've had a hard time growing it because there's something in my backyard that eats it like crazy, and I don't like to use pesticides, so it gets destroyed. I have another branch coming over here. And we'll be adding just a little bit of texture to this once it dries. But we're doing it brown because they kind of have a brown tint to it. Okay, beautiful. And then something else I want to do brown is the little stamen holding up the things that I don't know what their names are. Make these brown because they're usually a dark tone. You really need a small brush, a details brush here. We'll do this one. Actually, that's like a straight down view, and that is too. I'm just gonna like lightly dot in some brown here. Oh, one more place that you're gonna need brown. Although I didn't want to, you know what? We're gonna wait on that. Just leave it like that. We are going to finish up our petals here. And we're gonna wait until the brown dries there. But this petal down here needs another layer. So just come in there and add that layer. Now I say this in most of my paintings. You guys could work on this forever. Literally, I could spend 5 hours on painting this and adding layer upon layer upon layer. But for teaching purposes, I don't think many of you would stay with me for 5 hours. And that is why I make this a little bit shorter, because I do less layers, but just know that obviously there's a limit. You don't want to go overboard, but you can really just layer upon layer for a while in this if you wanted to. We're gonna come over here to this petal, and if you ever feel like you don't know if the color matches well, I like to keep a little piece of watercolor paper off to the side and I see if it matches. So I'm gonna do that up here just because I'm not concerned about this piece. And as I can see, this is way too red. So I need to bring in a lot more pink so it matches just a little better. And sometimes you need to pull up. Yeah, I still need more. Okay, that should do it now. And I'm just coming in, making sure to paint around that white part. Do a little outline here. And just make that color come up. Beautiful. Okay. And we're gonna do this one over here because the brown is dry now. If your brown's not dry though, make sure you wait until it's dry. Painting around the white. And leaving some of that really light pink still showing through. And then we have one more that didn't receive its second layer. Get that orangey, orange, red, yellow color. And just come in there and outline it. Rinse off your brush and spin it around. Okay. And then let's paint that green leaf that we never got to. I'm gonna add a little brown to it, or a little yellow. This one can be lighter because it's smaller, so you would assume that it kind of just sprouted. And usually leaves that just sprouted are a lot more green, like yellowy green. Just soak up some of that a little bit. Okay. All right, so we have our base layers down. But now what I want to do is I want to come in here and add just a little bit of shadow where I think that shadow would be. And to do that, I am grabbing a smaller brush. I'm going back to my size 2, although this brush does not have the best tip on it anymore. You do want something that has a pretty good tip on it. And I'm going into my pinkish blush color, and I'm going to make sure that it's more saturated because this is gonna be a shadow. And I'm gonna start over, let's see, is that wet? I can't remember. Okay, we can't start with that one. We'll start with this one. I'm grabbing that more saturated color. And if you ever feel like you wanna darken something, but you don't wanna add black, I really suggest darkening it without black. Add its opposing color. So for pink, the opposing color I would use is like a greenish blue, if you wanna kind of mute it out a little bit. And then I'm just coming, not too much water on my brush, and just adding a little darker shadow underneath here. And don't think about it too much. That's how we're gonna do it. And if you feel like you need to blend it, just grab a little bit of water on your brush and blend it. I'm gonna make the shadow come over here a little bit more too. Awesome. I'm also gonna do the same thing over here, just where there would be kind of a shadow right here. And okay, I'm gonna actually get my smaller details brush, and we're gonna add more shadows in. So this one, this is kind of the center area. So I'd definitely put another shadow here. And then just lightly blending it. The difference between how I'm blending the shadows now versus how we were kind of painting the whole petal before is that I'm only blending it just in a small area. Same thing over here. Now, look at this in a perspective. This is why it's kind of important to look at a photo when you're doing this kind of detailed work. But there would be a shadow here. Have to be sure to add in that shadow. My color is getting a little light, so I'm gonna mix up dark color again. And then I'm just adding in a shadow that would kind of come down here. I'm just blending it in a little bit. And honestly, it would probably be darker than that. So I'm gonna grab just a little bit darker. I actually have like a purple here. Not too purpley, mix it in with your original color. That's still not dark enough. Let's see. Sometimes, make it just little, okay. Just, there we go. I added in some green. So just a little bit, nothing crazy. But if you're going to use that color in one place, make sure you use it in a couple different places too, because it won't make sense only have it right there. So I'm gonna put a little bit of that same color in here to show a deeper shadow, maybe right here. Does that make sense, you guys? You don't wanna just use a color one time on your painting, because your mind will automatically put it together like, oh, that color is shadows. And if you don't use that anywhere else, it'll kind of look funky. So make sure you do that. And I'm gonna lighten it up a little bit and use it over here. It's behind these little pieces. I'm a bit congested today. I think it's allergies because all the flowers are blooming. All we're doing right now is we're just putting in shadows. So think about where the shadows would be. That is definitely part of being an artist and perfecting your skill, is being a observer of light and how it hits things. Very important for us as artists to know. And like I said, that dark color that we used over here, we want to make sure that we bring it into some different areas in the painting as well. And I'm going to bring it in right here because this would be a really shadowy area. It's very folded over itself. Have it blend a little bit and come out. And I'm also going to poke it in here. Maybe a little under here. And as you guys can see, doesn't it really start to come alive when you add in those shadows? It's pretty amazing. Like I said before, this could be something that you spend all day on if you really want to go at it. I do recommend experimenting with spending longer on your piece. I'm going to add a shadow here because this one would definitely be under this petal. Like I said, experiment and like come back to it if you want to come back to it tomorrow. Sometimes I'll work on a painting. I mean, a lot of times I'll work on a painting for a couple days. You don't have to do it all in one sitting, but it's definitely important to, if you like this style of painting, to kind of test your limits with the shadows and how long you want to work on it. Just lightly tapping in some of that darker shade. I'm going to bring it over here as well. Okay. All right, so we just want to finish up adding in any of our shadows to the pink areas. Maybe some down here. And definitely there would be a shadow over here. This overlap. And then this petal is looking a little bland, so I'm just going to add in just a little bit of yellow down here, kind of blend it in. Yeah, I like that. And maybe add just like a little yellow up here too. I could tinker with it all day. This happens all the time. Okay. Lastly, we're gonna work on this little orange one, and you wanna get that same color, but a slightly darker tone. If you need to mute it, add a little bit of blue. Not too much, you're gonna get brown. And I definitely want to make this a little darker shadow over here, like it's underneath it, but blend it in real nice. And this leaf, or this petal is kind of funky, so I'm gonna add a little color to that one as well. Just nicely blend it in. And maybe just darken this shadow here, because it doesn't look that dark. There we go. And soften it on the edge with a little bit of water. Okay. Our flower petals are good. We're gonna leave them as is. I do wanna work on this branch. We are just gonna make a line on the bottom, but leaving some of the brown, so it looks a little more dimensional. Mix up a green, a pretty dark green. You can add a little brown if you want to it, or yellow. And then just underneath, just make a line. So I'm not painting the whole branch. I'm just making a line underneath that runs along the bottom. And this is just gonna make it look and feel more three-dimensional. Make sure you get all the parts of it. If it's bothering you that the line is really straight, you can blend it a little bit with water, but just be very careful because we're working on a really thin line there. And I'm actually gonna do the same thing for the little stamen here. Now I want to make those little brown spots that are in the center of the white in our flowers. I'm grabbing a really dark brown here, and I'm just going to put a little dot in the middle. You could also do just a C shape. It doesn't even have to be a perfect circle. And my paper was wet and I made my watercolor move. And do that for all of them. Perfect. The last thing we're gonna do is add veins to the petals and the leaves. Let's start with our leaves because our leaves are dry. Now you can do one of two things here. You can either take a dark color paint to make the veins, or you can use a combination of that and white. If you have a white gel pen, if you have white gouache, this is basically white gouache that I'll be using, but I'm going to be adding this at the end for little highlights. But first, grab a dark green. And what you're gonna do is you're just gonna make that vein down the center. Make sure you have a brush that has pretty good detail, like the tip's really sharp so you can have good detail. And then we're going to do our typical leaf veins. I like to do them a little wobbly so it makes it look like there's a little more movement in the leaf. Same thing over here. And you can also alternate your color if you want to add a little more yellow to it or a little more like brown. We're gonna do this for all our leaves. Make sure if the leaves are lighter that you account for that with this vein. You want to make it a little bit lighter then. That was kind of a weird color, but that's okay. Another thing I want to mention is we do want to add some shadows where our leaves cross over with the flowers. Grab that same dark green and just lightly add where those areas would be. So right here definitely would be an area. And just rinse off your brush and have a little water to blend it along. The scrubbing motion, use the side of your brush. Don't ruin the tip of your brush. And same thing over here. This one definitely has a lot of shadows coming in right here. I'm just outlining where the shadow would be, making sure that my paint's wet, rinsing off my brush and getting just water and lightly blending that in. Okay, let's continue on with our last vein in this leaf. Another thing you could do to add, oh my gosh. I'm a mess today. Another thing that you can do to add shadows to your painting, I'm just cleaning off the paint that I just spilled everywhere, is getting that dark green again, maybe muting it down a little bit if you need to. You see how this one is kind of wobbly, where it wobbles in, technical term, just put a little darker shadow and it looks a little more textured. You can do that here too. Same thing over here. Okay. And I'll show you really quick with the white before we do the veins in the Bougainvillea. I'm just getting some of this white on the tip of my brush. Make sure it's pretty saturated. You don't want it to be really watery, and you definitely don't want it dripping off your brush. And I'm just going to accentuate some of this with a tiny little line. See, I'm not painting the whole thing, just painting some of it. So it looks almost like the sun's hitting it, just slightly. And we put them in a few choice places. Okay, last but not least, we are going to do the veins of the Bougainvillea petals, flowers. And I know it might seem crazy, but we're gonna grab brown because that's typically the color that they are. I'm grabbing a kind of reddish brown. And I'm just gonna come in here and start kind of fat at the bottom and then lighten, lighten, lighten. And this is still wet, so it's bleeding a little bit. We don't want that. But then just kind of making little teeny lines. We don't want to overdo it because it's so beautiful. We don't want to mess it all up. You can also grab a dark pink if you don't want to use brown. So I'm going to do that just on a couple of these. And this is wet still, so that's a problem. You need this to be dry because you do not want it to bleed. I'm okay with that. I kind of like that it kind of looks like it blends in a little bit more. Is this dry? Okay, this one's dry. So we can come down really light. And you could even mix some of that brown with the pink. I think that's a good choice. And they look just like the leaves. I suggest alternating your colors. So do some more brown, some more light pink, but you're always gonna start with a thicker line towards the bottom. And just little teeny lines. Such a unique flower. And you could do the same thing that we did for the leaves here, where it kind of curves in, just making a little scoop of a darker color. Makes it look like it's kind of folded on. Now this is looking like a face to me because those look like eyes. All right, back to what we were doing. Same thing. Making those nice veins, but not going overboard with them. You can even kind of skip. I don't like to make just one flat line. I like to kind of skip. Maybe grab brown. All right. Make sure you get all of them. They don't all have to, you know, look super pronounced. Oh, I almost forgot about the orange one. The orange one definitely looks a little more brown in it. All right. And there you have it, you guys. We have our beautiful Bougainvillea. You could add a little shadow. I just realized it would be nice to have a little shadow here to separate these little white parts. It might add just a little bit more to have that shadow around actually. Now I can't get it out of my head that this looks like a face. So my painting's ruined. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. If you followed along, can you please share your work on social media and tag me at Lavender and C? It's so fun to see what you guys create, and I always love to hear if this was helpful for you, if I taught you well and you enjoyed it. So please share in the comments, and thanks for watching.